My stepfather shoved me out the door at midnight, laughing as I fell on the concrete. My stepsister recorded it on her phone for fun. He said I was worthless trash. 2 years later, I walked back into their lives, not to beg, but to buy everything they owned and destroy their perfect little world. This is a story about betrayal, survival, and the sweetest revenge you'll ever hear. If you love seeing karma hit hard, stay until the very end. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Your support means everything and helps me share more powerful stories like this. My name is Bella, and I need to take you back to the worst night of my life to understand how I got my revenge. But first, let me tell you about the 8 months of hell that led up to it. My mother died on a Tuesday. They said she fell down the stairs. Just a tragic accident. I was at college when I got the call, and I remember dropping my phone, the screen shattering into 1,000 pieces just like my world. Mom was only 42 years old, healthy, careful. She didn't just fall, but I was 19, grieving, and nobody listened to a heartbroken daughter's suspicions. The funeral was small. Gerald, my stepfather, cried theatrical tears that looked perfect for the handful of guests. His daughter Natasha stood beside him in a designer dress, checking her phone every few minutes. I stood alone on the other side of the grave, wearing the only appropriate dress I owned, clutching my mother's necklace, a simple silver chain with a tiny heart pendant. It was the last thing she gave me. Gerald had married my mom 3 years earlier. She'd been a widow since I was 5, working 2 jobs to give me a good life, sacrificing everything. When Gerald came along with his charm, his seemingly stable job in real estate, and his promises of security, Mom thought she'd finally found happiness. She thought Natasha and I would become sisters. She thought we'd be a real family. She was wrong about everything. For the first year, Gerald played his part well. He was attentive, generous, kind. But I noticed small things. The way he'd check Mom's bank statements, how he insisted on being added to her accounts for convenience, the way he convinced her to put both their names on the house deed. Mom had inherited that house from her parents. It was supposed to be mine one day. After the wedding, things changed gradually. Natasha moved in, and suddenly I was sharing my home with a spoiled 21-year-old who treated me like I was beneath her. Gerald started criticizing Mom. Her cooking wasn't good enough. She wasn't taking care of herself. She was spending too much money on me. The warmth disappeared from our home, replaced by this cold tension that made my stomach hurt every time I walked through the door. Then, 8 months ago, Mom died, and the masks came off completely. I'll never forget the day, 2 weeks after the funeral, when I came home from my morning classes and found Gerald in Mom's bedroom, going through her jewelry box. He didn't even look guilty. He just said he was organizing things. That's when I found my mother's diary, hidden in a shoebox at the back of her closet. I took it to my room and read it cover to cover, crying so hard I thought I'd be sick. The entries from the last 6 months were terrifying. Mom had discovered Gerald was having an affair. She'd found out he was using her money to cover his failing business deals. She was planning to divorce him, to kick him out and protect my inheritance, and then the final entry, dated 2 days before she died. I'm afraid. Gerald threatened me today. He said if I try to leave him, I'll regret it. I need to talk to a lawyer tomorrow. She never made it to that tomorrow. I went to the police with the diary. The detective looked at me with pity and said there was nothing concrete, just worried thoughts. He suggested I was looking for someone to blame because of grief. I left that police station knowing that Gerald had murdered my mother and was going to get away with it. Life became unbearable after that. Gerald stopped pretending to care. I became the live-in maid. I woke up at 5 in the morning to make breakfast for him and Natasha. I cleaned the entire house, did their laundry, cooked their meals. They ate steak and salmon while I got whatever leftovers they didn't want. Natasha would leave her clothes on the floor, her dishes on the counter, and scream at me if I didn't clean them up fast enough. I was still trying to attend community college, studying business administration. It was the only thing keeping me sane, the only path to eventually escaping. I also worked part-time at an upscale restaurant downtown, wearing that crisp white uniform, serving wealthy people who probably spent more on one meal than I earned in a week. But I was saving every penny in a secret bank account Mom had helped me open years ago. It wasn't much. I'd managed to save $340, but it was mine, and Gerald didn't know about it. Then I discovered the worst betrayal of all. I found documents in Gerald's office, forged papers that transferred all of Mom's assets to him alone. The will had been changed. The house was now entirely in his name. Mom's savings account, emptied. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd wanted to leave me, stolen through falsified documents and a corrupt lawyer's signature. I confronted him. God, I was so stupid. I should have been smarter, should have planned better. But I was 20 years old and furious, and I walked into the living room with those papers in my hand, shaking with rage. Gerald was watching television. Natasha was painting her nails on the couch. I threw the papers at his feet and screamed that I knew what he'd done, that I was going to the police, that he wouldn't get away with stealing my inheritance. He stood up slowly, and for the first time, I saw real anger on his face. He walked over to me, and before I could react, he slapped me hard across the face. The force of it knocked me sideways, and I tasted blood in my mouth. Natasha laughed. She actually pulled out her phone and started recording. Gerald leaned close and whispered, "Who's going to believe a nobody like you? I have lawyers. I have money. I have connections. You have nothing." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, my cheeks still throbbing, and I knew I had to do something. I searched my room, looking for any evidence I could use, anything to prove what Gerald had done, and that's when I made my fatal mistake. I went back to his office. I was searching through his desk when I heard sirens. Police sirens, coming to our house. Gerald had called them first. He'd planted one of Natasha's expensive bracelets in my room and reported it stolen. When the police arrived, they searched my room and found it exactly where Gerald said it would be. I was arrested, handcuffed, humiliated in front of our neighbors. At the station, the officer told me I should be grateful. Gerald had decided not to press charges if I agreed to leave his home and never come back. But there was more. Gerald had made sure I now had a police record, an arrest for theft. He told me that if I ever tried to go to the police about the forged will, he'd make sure everyone knew I was a thief who was just trying to scam money from her grieving stepfather. He'd destroy any credibility I had. I was released at 11:30 that night. I took a rideshare back to the house, my hands still shaking, my mind racing. I just wanted to grab some clothes and leave, to figure out my next move. But Gerald had other plans. When I walked through the front door, he and Natasha were waiting. All of my belongings were packed in garbage bags on the front lawn. Not suitcases, garbage bags. My clothes, my books, my photographs, everything thrown together like trash. Gerald grabbed my arm and dragged me back outside. I tried to resist, but he was stronger. He shoved me hard and I fell on the concrete driveway, my knee cracking against the pavement. Pain shot through my leg, and I felt warm blood soaking through my jeans. Natasha stood in the doorway, her phone out, recording the whole thing and laughing. Actually laughing like it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. Gerald stood over me and spit. The saliva landed on my arm and I felt something inside me break. He said, "Your mother was a fool, and you're even worse. You're nothing. You'll come crawling back within a week, begging me to take you in. But I won't. You're dead to us." Natasha added, "Don't come back, trash." Then they went inside and locked the door. I sat there on the curb, bleeding, surrounded by garbage bags full of my life, and I watched as our neighbors peeked through their curtains. Not one of them came out to help. Not one person asked if I was okay. I took 3 things from those garbage bags: my mother's necklace, her diary, and the $340 I'd saved. I left everything else there on that lawn and walked away from the only home I'd ever known. That first night, I slept in a 24-hour laundromat. I sat in a plastic chair, my injured knee wrapped in paper towels, and I cried until I had no tears left. Then I stopped crying and started planning. I found the cheapest motel I could, $30 a night for a room that smelled like cigarettes and had suspicious stains on the carpet. I did the math. I had enough money for maybe 10 days, 11 if I didn't eat much. I still had my job at the restaurant, but the paychecks were small, and rent for even the worst apartment would take everything I earned. I went back to the police station, different officer this time. I tried to explain about the forged will, about my mother's diary, about Gerald's threats. The officer listened politely and then told me this was a civil matter. I'd need to take it to court. Did I have a lawyer? Number? Could I afford one? Number. He suggested I move on with my life. I worked double shifts at the restaurant. My knee was still healing, and standing for 12 hours straight felt like torture, but I couldn't afford to lose this job. I wore that white uniform with pride because it was all I had left. The other servers gossiped about their weekend plans, their boyfriends, their college classes. I stayed quiet and counted my tips. 3 weeks after Gerald threw me out, a man came into the restaurant just before closing time. We were supposed to stop seating people, but my manager made an exception. The man was well-dressed, maybe 32 years old, wearing an expensive suit. He sat in my section and ordered just a coffee. I was exhausted, running on 4 hours of sleep, and I probably looked terrible. But I brought him his coffee with a smile because that's what the job required. He looked at me, really looked at me, not through me like most customers did, and asked if I was okay. The question surprised me so much that I answered honestly, "I'm fine. Just tired." He noticed my textbooks behind the counter. Business administration. He asked if I was in school, and I explained I was taking night classes when I could afford them. He left me a $50 tip on a $5 coffee. When I tried to refuse, he said, "You work hard." Keep it. His name was Daniel. He came back the next night, and the night after that. Always my section, always close to closing, always just coffee. We started talking. Short conversations at first, then longer ones. He told me he owned a tech investment company. I told him about my business classes, carefully avoiding any mention of Gerald or my current living situation. On his 7th visit, he asked if I'd be interested in a job as his office assistant. The salary was $4,000 a month. I nearly dropped the coffee pot. I asked what the catch was. There had to be a catch. Daniel looked me straight in the eye and said, "No catch. I've been watching you work for the past week. You're efficient, professional, intelligent, and you have something most people I hire don't have. You're hungry. You want more from life. I believe in potential. Prove me right or prove me wrong." I accepted the job. What choice did I have? But I was also terrified. In my experience, when things seemed too good to be true, they usually were. I was wrong about Daniel. The job was real. He treated me with respect, paid me on time, and most importantly, he taught me. He showed me how to read financial reports, how to analyze investment opportunities, how to negotiate contracts. He saw potential in me that no one else ever had. 3 months into the job, something happened that changed everything. I was organizing files in Daniel's office when I saw a business magazine on his desk. There, on page 43, was a photo of Gerald at some real estate conference. The article talked about his company, mentioning some recent setbacks but painting him as a successful businessman. I felt sick. This man who'd destroyed my life was out there being celebrated while I was still sleeping in that disgusting motel room, still eating 1 meal a day to save money. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I researched Gerald's business thoroughly. I found public records, business filings, investor reports, and I discovered something beautiful. His company was failing. Badly. He'd been taking illegal shortcuts, bribing building inspectors, cutting corners on construction projects. He was drowning in debt, barely keeping up appearances. I realized something important. Gerald was vulnerable, and I had just started working for someone who could teach me exactly how to destroy him. I didn't tell Daniel everything at first, just that I'd had a difficult past with my stepfather, that he'd stolen my inheritance through forged documents. Daniel was furious on my behalf. He offered to help me hire lawyers to pay for legal fees, but I refused. I told him, "Teach me how to do this myself. Teach me how to be powerful enough that people like him can never hurt me again." And he did. For the next year, Daniel became my mentor. He taught me business strategy, real estate law, investment analysis, negotiation tactics. I studied obsessively. Every spare moment I was reading, learning, planning. This knowledge wasn't just education, it was my weapon. I also hired a private investigator with my first big bonus check. The investigator found the corrupt lawyer who'd helped Gerald forge my mother's will. The lawyer was dying of cancer and wanted to clear his conscience. He gave me a signed confession, detailing everything Gerald had paid him to do. After a year with Daniel's company, I'd built my own investment portfolio. I was worth $200,000, every cent earned honestly, through smart investments and hard work. Daniel had promoted me to junior business partner. I had an apartment now, a nice one. I had professional clothes, I had power. Daniel and I had grown close during that year. Very close. He was divorced, had been for years, and had thrown himself into work. He told me he'd met thousands of people in his career, but I was different. I'd refused his help because I wanted to earn everything myself. That integrity meant something to him. When he told me he had feelings for me, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wondered if I only felt something for him because he'd saved me. But that wasn't it. Daniel had never treated me like a victim or a project. He treated me like an equal, like someone worthy of respect. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. We started dating carefully, keeping it professional at work. 6 months later, I knew I loved him. Not because of his money or his success, but because he saw me, the real me, the girl who'd been thrown out like garbage and refused to stay down. Daniel's company made a major acquisition that year. The business was now worth $500 million. As his partner, my share was $15 million. I was independently wealthy. But the money wasn't the point anymore. The point was what I could do with that power. I hired a better investigator. I learned everything about Gerald and Natasha. Gerald's company was on the verge of collapse. He'd borrowed money from some very dangerous people to stay afloat. Natasha was engaged to a guy named Andrew, whose family was wealthy and respected. They were planning a big wedding in 3 months. Gerald needed that wedding to happen. Andrew's family was going to invest in his company. It was his last hope. That's when I knew exactly how to destroy him. Daniel proposed to me at a private dinner. The ring was beautiful, but what he said mattered more. Be my equal partner in everything. Not because I'm giving you anything, but because you've earned it. I said yes, not because of the money or the lifestyle, but because I'd finally found someone who loved me for who I was. But before I could move forward with my new life, I had to finish what Gerald started. I tipped off building inspectors anonymously about Gerald's illegal construction practices. 3 of his properties were shut down overnight. He lost major contracts. His company's stock crashed. I watched it happen from my downtown office, drinking expensive coffee, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. Then I did something clever. I joined the same country club as Andrew's family. I made friends with Andrew's mother, Catherine. I never mentioned my connection to Natasha. I just casually, carefully planted seeds of doubt about Gerald's business practices. Catherine started investigating on her own. The engagement party was held at the city's most expensive hotel. Daniel and I received an invitation because we were now prominent members of the business community. I bought a stunning red dress for the occasion. When I looked in the mirror that night, I didn't recognize myself. The girl who'd been thrown out in garbage bags was gone. In her place stood a confident, powerful woman. Natasha didn't recognize me at first. I'd lost weight from stress and gained it back in muscle from regular gym sessions. My hair was professionally styled. My makeup was flawless. I looked like I belonged in that ballroom full of wealthy people. But then our eyes met across the room. I saw the exact moment recognition hit her. Her face went completely white. She grabbed Gerald's arm, pointing at me. Gerald turned, saw me standing there with Daniel, and nearly choked on his champagne. I walked over to them slowly, enjoying every second of their panic. Gerald tried to recover, putting on a fake smile. "Bella, sweetheart, we've been so worried about you." I spoke loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Really? Is that before or after you threw me out in garbage bags at midnight?" People started paying attention. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Natasha tried to grab my arm to pull me away, but I stepped back. "Don't touch me." You filmed the whole thing, remember? Want me to show everyone? Andrew's family was watching now, confused and concerned. I didn't make a scene. I was too sophisticated for that now. Instead, I smiled politely, excused myself, and left the party with Daniel. But before I left, I'd made sure that an anonymous package was delivered to Andrew's father. The package contained copies of all Gerald's business violations, proof of the forged will, evidence of his corrupt connections, and a link to the video Natasha had posted on her private social media account, me being shoved out of the house, falling on the concrete, while they laughed. Andrew's father confronted Gerald right there at the engagement party. In front of everyone, he called off the engagement. Andrew was confused, trying to understand what was happening, but his father was firm. No son of his would marry into a family of criminals and frauds. Natasha screamed. She actually screamed at me across the ballroom. "You ruined my life." I looked at her calmly and said, "No, I'm just returning what you gave me." Then I left. The next morning, my lawyer served Gerald with a lawsuit. I was suing for my rightful inheritance, plus damages for emotional distress, plus interest for the time he'd stolen my money. Gerald couldn't afford a good lawyer anymore. He was broke, his company was failing, and no one would help him. He tried to fight it. He threatened me, tried to intimidate me one last time. But I wasn't a scared 19-year-old anymore. I had lawyers, money, and most importantly, I had evidence. The court case was faster than I expected. The dying lawyer testified about the forgery. My investigator presented documentation of every illegal thing Gerald had done. I showed the judge my mother's diary. I requested a new investigation into my mother's death. The new autopsy results came back suspicious. Bruising that didn't match a simple fall. Evidence of a struggle. Police opened a criminal investigation. Gerald was arrested. Not just for fraud and forgery, but for potential manslaughter in my mother's death. I won everything. The house, the money, damages that totaled over $800,000. But more than that, I won justice. Gerald made bail, but he was a broken man. His business was gone. His reputation was destroyed. Natasha had abandoned him, moving in with friends who would eventually get tired of her. He had nothing and no one. One day, he came to my office. Security called to ask if they should send him away. I told them to let him up. Gerald walked into my corner office, and I barely recognized him. He'd aged 10 years in 6 months. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by cheap, wrinkled clothes. His hands were shaking. He got on his knees and begged. Actually begged with tears running down his face. "Please," he said. "I'll do anything." "I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. Please help me." I looked down at him from my desk chair, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, just emptiness where hatred used to live. "When I begged you to believe me about the forged will, you laughed," I said quietly. "When I fell on that concrete and bled, you spit on me. When I had nothing, you made sure I had less than nothing." "I know," he sobbed. "I know I was terrible. Please, I'm sorry." I let him cry for a moment. Then I made my offer. "I could let you go to prison for killing my mother. The evidence is circumstantial, but it's enough. You're looking at 15 to 20 years. He looked up at me, desperate hope in his eyes. "Or," I continued, "I can arrange for you to plead to lesser charges. Manslaughter instead of murder. Maybe you'll get 7 years, maybe less with good behavior." "Yes," he gasped. "Yes, please. Anything. In exchange, you'll do exactly what I tell you. You'll publicly confess to everything you did to me and my mother. You'll apologize in front of everyone you know. And when you get out of prison, you'll work for my mother's memorial foundation. Minimum wage, whatever job I assign you, for as long as I say." Gerald agreed to everything. He had no choice. The trial was quick. Gerald pleaded guilty to manslaughter, fraud, and forgery. He made his public confession in court, admitting everything. Natasha wasn't charged with anything. She hadn't known about the murder, but her reputation was destroyed. No one wanted to associate with her. Gerald was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Daniel and I got married 3 months later. It was a beautiful wedding, small and intimate, filled with people who actually cared about us. I wore my mother's necklace with my designer gown. Gerald was in prison. Natasha wasn't invited. I was surrounded by Daniel's warm, loving family who welcomed me like I'd always belonged. For the first time in years, I felt peace. 6 months after the wedding, I bought my mother's house from the court-ordered sale of Gerald's assets. I renovated it completely, erasing every trace of him. Then I turned it into Grace Memorial Home, named after my mother. It's a shelter for women escaping abuse, offering them safety, resources, and job training. Gerald's part of the deal started when he got out of prison. He works there now as a janitor, cleaning bathrooms, mopping floors, taking out trash. Every day he has to see the good that came from my mother's memory. Every day he has to watch women rebuild their lives after men like him tried to destroy them. I visit the shelter once a month. I see Gerald sometimes, pushing a mop or scrubbing toilets. He looks old now, defeated. He doesn't look at me anymore. Natasha tried to contact me once, about a year after everything happened. She sent a letter saying she was sorry, that she'd been influenced by her father, that she hoped we could reconcile. I burned the letter. Some things can't be forgiven. She works at a retail store now. I saw her once when I was shopping. She saw me too, saw my expensive clothes and jewelry. I didn't acknowledge her. I just walked past like she was invisible. Because to me, she is. People sometimes ask me if the revenge made me happy, if destroying Gerald gave me satisfaction. The truth is complicated. Yes, seeing him face consequences felt good. Watching him lose everything he'd stolen felt right. But you know what felt better? Building a life he said I'd never have. Becoming successful not to prove him wrong, but to prove to myself that I was always worth more than he said I was. My mother didn't die in vain. Her diary saved me. Her love gave me strength. Her belief in me, even from the grave, made me fight when I wanted to give up. Gerald is in prison. Natasha is alone and struggling. And me? I'm free. Free from their cruelty, free from their control, free from the girl who sat on that curb surrounded by garbage bags. I'm Bella, and this is how I stopped being a victim and became unstoppable. Thank you for watching my journey from victim to victor. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they can rise from anything. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories of survival and revenge. Remember, they can throw you out, but they can't stop you from coming back stronger. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation. I'll see you in the next story. Stay strong.